Betsy DeVos was up in front of the House Appropriations Committee to answer for the way her Department of Education has been functioning, frankly. One of the things that DeVos has done as head of the Department of Education was to rescind guidance on school discipline after the Office of Civil Rights found that students of color are suspended 3 times more than white students. So, in other words, one of the functions of the Department of Education, we saw it in the context of transgender bathrooms, just reminding schools, this is what the law is. We do not discriminate. If you're receiving federal funds, we do not discriminate against people on certain bases. And when the Office of Civil Rights within the Justice Department finds that maybe there's a racial disparity in housing, for instance, it goes to HUD. And, in terms of public housing, if they find, maybe they find in certain work environments, so they'll go to the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor will amend regulations or send out regulations or institute new regulations. Well, the same thing in the context of schools. The Office of Civil Rights, that is, this is the one that's in the U.S. Department of Education, found that students of color are suspended 3 times more than white students. And so there were regulations that were put out to make sure that this disparity was not a function, or at least mitigate, on some level, attempt to mitigate the impact of racism on these type of decisions. We've seen, video in the past of, cops coming down to handcuff an elementary kid's school. And this is a real phenomena, of course, that takes place in our schools, as it does, reflected throughout our society. And Betsy DeVos apparently does not think it's that much of a problem, so she rescinded the requirements. And here is Barbara Lee asking her about it.
Can you explain that?
Well, Congresswoman, no child should be treated or disciplined differently based on his or her race or color or national origin. And if and when they are, our Office for Civil Rights will act swiftly, has acted swiftly. Children need to be treated as individuals.
But they're not being treated as individuals. That's why we had this order put in place. And you rescinded that.
Again, any student that is treated or disciplined differently because of his or her color or race,
Madam Secretary,
going to be, the
Department of Civil Rights, your own Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights indicated that students of color are suspended 3 times more than white students. We put into place some requirements that would begin to turn this around. You rescinded those requirements. So
Again,
what message does this send to school districts?
No student should be treated or disciplined differently.
But Madam Secretary, they are treated differently. They are treated differently.
No, if they are, it's discrimination.
Well, then why in the world would you rescind the orders that would correct for this?
The letter amounted to quotas. Children are individuals. They're not.
Madam Secretary, this didn't involve quotas. This gave direction on how to correct this horrible problem that we have throughout the country. You go to any community of color where you have schools that are trying to, with minimal resources, provide the best education they can, and you will see what is taking place. So this did not amount to quotas. This amounted to providing those tools and guidance to make sure that students' civil rights are protected. And you rescinded that.
Every community needs to be able to handle their classrooms and discipline in the way that works for them. And if
Madam Secretary, thank God we had Brown versus Board of Education. The federal government gave us a chance to go to public schools. We needed the federal government to provide that oversight for civil rights protection.
Now, understand what's going on here. She is arguing we are servicing this problem by addressing it after the fact. If these kids can prove that this was racially motivated in some type of federal investigation that would take place where everyone at the school would be obviously claiming that it had nothing to do with race. I mean, this is like the functional equivalent of saying, hey, there's a lot of crime going on in that area. Well, we're going to have, if people are victims of crime, they should definitely come down to the police station and report it. Well, but don't you think we should have any cops on the beat so that maybe the folks aren't victims of crime as much? Well, certainly crime is bad. And we are open 24 hours to take your complaints that you have been a victim of a crime. And the point is that she is, the subtext of what she's saying there is, this is not a function of racism. The reason why there's a disparity is because the black kids who are being punished at a rate 3 times more than their white counterparts are just acting badly.
Well, she literally says people are getting, they need to be individually treated appropriately. Anything other than would be discrimination. So if you have no enforcement mechanism and you're eliminating the enforcement mechanisms, right? Precisely, she's saying there should be disproportionate treatment.
She is exactly. She's saying we don't want any restrictions upon how we should exercise. She's just saying, like, I don't believe it's racism. I mean, this is a dynamic that we see also with police departments in the context of the DOJ, basically, Jeff Sessions saying to all these police departments around the country, don't worry, guys, you go to town. We trust you. You got this, despite the fact that maybe there was a couple misunderstandings in the past. This is the same as the Supreme Court, dominated by 5 Republican justices, saying, despite the fact that the Voting Rights Act has been ratified by the Senate a couple of years ago, we don't need preclearance anymore because we don't believe that there's any racism involved in these voting laws. That's exactly the same dynamic. So there's a pattern here. I mean, I hope people see this pattern. I mean, nothing I'm saying is particularly profound, but this is a dynamic that is now permeated every aspect of Republican culture.
Remember what Justice Roberts said wrote in the decision gutting the Voting Rights Act?
Good way to end discrimination is to stop practicing
right,
it.
Exactly.
Same thing right there.
Well,
right.
That's absolutely true. And I mean, no, not what he wrote is true, but all of the things you've been saying are absolutely true. And I think even more specifically, besides just being a total ghoul who looks like she wants to unhinge her jaw and swallow a black child whole every time I see her, she supports charter schools. And charter schools are on the record as being much, much worse in terms of these racial disparities and punishment.
You'll find that
she's
I want to
probably
swallow
protecting
all
them
children.
as well.
It's any child of any underprivileged background. That could even be your wealthy kid who's handicapped, as an example. But pretty much any kid making underneath 40 a year is more useful as broader sacrifice.
Just swallowing black kids would be discriminatory.
Do you think she's looked up what Brown versus the Board of Education was?
You're throwing a whole lot of words.
And she calls... Yes, and that's what she has filed under things that are unjust.
Things that are racist. Number 1, Brown versus Board of Education.
Well,
Congressman, you're throwing a whole lot of words at me, and I don't know what they mean, but I'm going to take them as disrespect.